Thank you. I'm pleased to rise to speak in support of the Building Legislation Amendment Bill 2023. The Andrews Labor government is committed to delivering a building industry that provides safe, compliant and durable buildings and houses. Strengthening our building system will benefit consumers, give builders and industry more confidence and certainty, and reduce the need for costly rectification work. This bill will provide greater certainty for industry and help to put consumers, these people who live, work and use these buildings, at the very heart of the building system where they belong. The bill's legislative amendments have a key focus on consumer protection and will implement reforms that will reshape and strengthen the system of regulations that enforce compliance in Victoria. The Victorian building sector is made up of a number of agencies, each with an important role to play in maintaining a safe and well-regulated industry. A number of reviews, including the Building System Review Stage 1, have highlighted that a lack of coordination, information sharing and data collection is a central issue for regulating the building industry. Consumers are often frustrated at the duplication of processes or requirements to provide information to different entities within the building system. There is an expectation that building systems entities should work together to support how consumers interact with the system. The building regulatory system in Victoria has not been comprehensively examined since the early 1990s. This bill will begin that very important work. It will implement key improvements identified by the Building System Review Expert Panel, with further reform to follow as this panel continues its work. The legislation will formalise and strengthen the role of the State Building Surveyor within the Victorian Building Authority. This is a role which is already established, but the legislation will give it a statutory role as the primary source of expertise and technical guidance for the building and also the plumbing industries. This includes the power to issue binding determinations relating to the technical interpretation of building and plumbing regulations, codes and standards. This bill will further establish the role of a building monitor to represent domestic building consumer interests in the building system, with a key focus on systematic issues. At present, there is no overarching peak body or dedicated organisation representing Victorian domestic building consumers. The building system is designed in a way that does not sufficiently consider the needs, abilities or experiences of domestic building consumers, and their voices are absent from the key decision-making bodies. The Building Monitor aims to address this gap with the responsibility of representing and advocating for consumers on systematic issues within the building industry. The Monitor will advise the Minister for Planning on systematic issues and risk facing domestic building consumers, and they will publish an annual Building Monitor Issues Report with key findings and recommendations to the government. The bill expands the categories of building practitioners required to be registered to enable the regulation of building designers, project managers, site supervisors and, of course, building consultants. Fundamentally, this is about ensuring that practitioners have the necessary skills or qualifications to carry out complex and high-risk work. The regulation of these categories of practitioner will depend on the types of work that they carry out, first being prescribed in regulations, and the public will first be consulted on the regulations before they are made. The legislation takes further steps to ensure that consumers in the building industry are protected with the best possible access to all information. It introduces a requirement that a draft building manual be prepared by the applicant for an occupancy permit and provided to the relevant building surveyor for appeal. Building manuals are intended to be a single source of all relevant information relating to the design, construction and ongoing maintenance of a building. The building manual will address a significant hurdle for owners and owners' corporations in accessing information about their building. By making information about the design, the construction and the maintenance of a building more readily accessible, the building manual will assist not only owners and owners' corporations, but also other parties such as building practitioners and regulators in the future. Once the draft building manual has been approved by the relevant building surveyor, the manual will be provided to the owners and the owners' corporations, who will be responsible for maintaining and keeping the documentation current and up to date. This bill will also require the relevant building surveyor to provide, at the time of issuing a building permit, a document that clearly details their roles and also their responsibilities. This will improve consumer understanding about the role of functions of building surveyors in the building permit process. All of this will enable better transparency and reporting on the health of the building system. Equally important is that the legislation amends the distribution of the cladding rectification levy. This will allow government greater flexibility to determine how the levy should be directed to support rectification of buildings found to have non-compliant combustible cladding. Several high-profile building failures in Australia and also around the world have rightly shaken the public's confidence in the building regulatory system. This especially includes the use of combustible cladding, which led to the tragic Grenfell Tower fire in London in 2017. This claimed 72 lives tragically, as well as fires here in Melbourne at the La Crosse apartment building in Docklands in 2014 and the Neo 200 building in the CBD in 2019. I can remember in 2019, around the time of that fire at the Neo 200, there was fear in the community and especially those who lived in apartment buildings. We had a residents' meeting at the apartment block which I lived in at the time, and absolutely everyone wanted to know about cladding and the issues that could potentially arise. The concern and anxiety of tenants was understandably palpable. The financial cost alone of the combustible cladding crisis has been substantial, with many owners facing significant rectification costs to ensure that their homes are safe to live in. To say nothing of the stress on homeowners and risk to health and safety. This is why the Andrews Labor government launched a $600 million package in 2019 to fix buildings with high-risk combustible cladding. The bill will now enable buildings that fall outside of the funded cladding rectification activity to be supported with funding made available to deliver relevant programs to facilitate cladding rectification. Speaker, a strong and viable system of regulation to enforce compliance is vital in the building industry, and an experienced and skilled workforce is absolutely indispensable to enforce that this compliance is upheld. It goes without saying that safety is and always should be a main priority in the building industry. That's why unions which represent workers in the building industry and associated industries, including the mighty CFMEU, the Plumbers Union, the Electrical Trades Union, and of course the Manufacturers Workers Union, and their armies of organisers, shop stewards, OH&S delegates, and of course the thousands of members that they represent, deserve a special mention and to be commended for upholding the health and safety of workers and consumers alike in this very hazardous industry. Safety is paramount and no one goes to work wanting to be in harm's way. I know that these unions and their members will continue to contribute to a best practice building regulatory framework and uphold the health and safety of their workforce, consumers and residents alike in and around the building industry. I am pleased that the Labor Andrews government is also establishing a parliamentary inquiry into bosses who refuse to pay their subcontractors in the building and plumbing industry, as well as preparing a new registration and licensing scheme for building trade subcontractors and, of course, workers. The state government is also preparing for the commencement of the new edition of the National Construction Code this year, delivering significant improvements to building standards that improve occupant access, health, safety and amenity outcomes, and will apply to most new Australian residential and commercial buildings. This bill delivers much-needed reform to Victoria's building system, placing consumer protection as central to these changes, and that is why I'm very pleased to support this bill. Thank you, Speaker.